Yep, everyone is already here and they can hear.
Okay,
Brilliant.
so let's let everybody in.
Yep.
Yep. So thank everybody for joining tonight. We're going to wait a little bit longer because it's about a minute or two. Barry, first and foremost, thank you very, very much for on this important night in lots of different ways. Not just the night after bonfires, but lots of things happening in America and other places like that, for joining us to let us talk a little bit about your work and your career and to taste some chocolates, which are designed to go along with that. So just to sort of explain a little bit about how it's going to sort of work, what I'm going to try and do, when I can figure out how to do this stuff, is the aim of tonight is basically to walk through Barry's career, life, and everything else, but use a bunch of chocolates to taste our way through that career and that life. And I hope you've all also got some wine, which will go with it. If you don't have the chocolates, don't worry, because when you do get the chocolates, you'll be able to sort of see this on YouTube and everything else like that. We're doing this as a webinar just because that means we can record it. But also, we are going to invite you, please, to use something called menti.com, which will share with you the numbers and everything to basically share what you're tasting. And we will also be basically trying to take as many different questions as we can. And then as we sort of go on towards the end, we'll stop recording and we'll open it up to a more general conversation. And we'll invite you all to either become panelists or to basically be able to contribute or anything else like that. So that's sort of where we are. And that's where we're going to go. If there's any dangerous slides, we'll also give you a trigger warning. We will also warn you if there are any milk chocolates as they come through. And in fact, the first two chocolates we're going to be tasting are milk chocolates. So anybody who's lactose sensitive, please be a bit aware on those too. Right, given that, let's start. So Barry, I know you as being a great Glaswegian. I know that's where you first went to university, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of, what it was that you got up to in Glasgow, and maybe a little bit about also what sort of chocolates you think people from Glasgow would go after, other than sort of, sort of refried Mars bars and that sort of stuff.
So thank you very much, Spencer, for inviting me to do this. It's a little daunting to have one's life in chocolate, but I think of this that we're all sharing, and thank you for coming along this evening. I think of this as something we can share pleasurably before we can exhale while we wait for more news from the US. So this is a very nice way to pass that crucial time. So yeah, I grew up in Glasgow and I went to school and university there, and I put up these shots because I just want to remind people that Glasgow is actually a really nice place. Certainly in the west end of the city where I grew up and schooled and went to university, it's not the usual image of Glasgow as that terrifying, no mean city, the hard streets and so on. This is really quite pleasant. It's very green. Glasgow actually means that dear green place. And the two buildings you see on your left and in the center, one is Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum, and it faces the University of Glasgow, and that's the tower of the University of Glasgow you see in the middle. Now, the building on the far left, Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum, it used to be known affectionately by the Glaswegians as the Kremlin, because it does look like a huge towered red brick building. And the use of it for me will come a little later in the talk, as I'll remind you what it was. But just slightly behind and to the side of the university, you've got these beautiful sandstone terraces and again, more towers and architecture. So it's a really nice place. However, the Glaswegians were not actually very well known for cuisine. Many people will know that Glasgow has had for many years the world's highest record for coronary heart disease. They were always the lead table for that. They ate a lot of sugar and a lot of fat. I didn't really see many vegetables when I was growing up. In fact, mashed potato and chips were regarded as 2 of your 5 veg. So it was not surprising perhaps that chocolate-wise, Glaswegians would never have thought of going beyond milk chocolate. Milk chocolate was the thing. And we had no idea about craft chocolate then, and we thought every chocolate was a milk chocolate. And we're therefore going to start tonight by just reminding ourselves of the beauty. This is the Tcho bar, which you have. reminding yourself of the beauty of a milk chocolate. Creamier, and the creaminess often suggests to the brain sweetness as well as it having quite a bit of sweetness. This is a 39% cocoa solid. So let's try a bit of this, because I want to try to get us used to how we're going to taste. And the thing is, when you log on to mentimeter.com, if you've got menti.com, sorry, on your phone, you will be asked for a code, and the code is at the top of the screen. It's 23 68 38 2. So 23 68 38 2. And what we want you to do is, as we taste all the chocolates we're having tonight, it would be lovely if in the Menti system you were to enter any descriptions, any thoughts, any associations, texture, taste, flavors that you pick out, and we can put these on the screen and we can see collectively what we're getting. So let's try this first of all, the milk chocolate. Pop that in my mouth. So people are saying cooling, creamy and caramel. Certainly get the creaminess straight away. Fudgy, texture is interesting. Caramel, I get a kind of woody note that comes just behind the caramel. Very schoolboy chocolate flavor for me, because it seems to be almost between having caramel and chewing the end of your pencil. So there's a little bit of lead pencil in there, come caramel, with the creaminess, some vanilla, the wood, butterscotch, yes, definitely think that's there too. The fudgy texture, interesting that people are picking up on that. The cooling sensation, I'm going to leave that to talk about it later, because that's very important, and where that comes from and how that arises is interesting. But we certainly get the, people say toffee, yes, definitely sweet, definitely caramel, definitely nutty, and definitely the sort of thing that Glaswegians would absolutely adore. So Glasgow, having had the world's highest rate of coronary heart disease in the west of Scotland, one year they found out that they'd come second on that leaderboard, and the Glaswegians all asked, well, who came first? And they were told it's Polynesian Islanders. And they said, we'll fight them. So that's Glasgow character for you, absolutely through and through. So I did my undergraduate training there, and I was a philosophy student, and philosophy is one of those things which, when you ask professional philosophers how they ever came to think and first study philosophy, there's usually an incident in their past, especially as a child, where they had early philosophical ideas. I think children are natural philosophers. They ask questions which later they're told to leave, or they have no satisfactory answer for. And you might think of a philosopher as somebody who goes on asking why, and there's no dialectical slap to stop them. They just go on asking. However, for me, I remember seeing a blind man with a stick walking along the street, and he passed a pillar box, a red pillar box. And I remember being very struck by the question, how would he know what the color of the pillar box was? Touching it wouldn't work, smelling it, tasting it. None of these things would give him the information. And if he had always been blind, how would he ever know what colors were? And that question, very familiar, I'm sure, to lots of people, it flipped around when I began to work on smell, because what would it be like to try to explain to someone who had never had a sense of smell what smells were? And I have a friend, a Spanish philosopher, Marta Tafalla, who was not diagnosed as being congenitally nosmic, having no sense of smell until she was 14. And then the really interesting thing was that up till then, she thought she had all of her senses working. She was perceiving the world as everyone else was. Her world was complete. And then people started talking about something invisible, something very important to them. And she has wondered and spent a lot of her life wondering, what are smells? What are people talking about? So if we move to the next slide, I wanted just to say something about the importance of smell. Now, this is the inside of the the building that you saw, Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum, affectionately known as the Kremlin by Glaswegians. And we were all taken there as children, as school children, and by our parents. And when we return in later life, next slide, please, you realize that the smell of Kelvin Grove is exactly the same. You had smelled that odor, that distinctive odor, when you were there as a child, when you returned as an adult. When people bring their own children back, they realize it still has that characteristic smell, and therefore smells very powerful and evocative of our childhood. It really does take us right back. And there's a funny distinctiveness about it. I think all of us have favorite places, maybe favorite galleries, and we know how they smell. This is a smell that's somewhere between old stone and furniture polish, but I walk in there and I'm relieved that it has that smell, because it's a bit of my past. So if we go back now to how smell becomes important, not just a memory, we go on, we think of how it becomes important to our perception of the world around us, and we can go on. Spencer, we can have the next slide. I then moved from being an undergraduate philosopher at Glasgow, something most Scots never do. I moved to the other city. I moved to Edinburgh. And Edinburgh, as you can see, much more austere, much colder, much more serious city in a way than Glasgow. There's a lot of rivalry between these two cities, and Edinburgh is the sort of city where, unlike Glasgow, if you knock on a friend's door in Glasgow, they'll say, come in and have some tea. And if you do that in Edinburgh, they'll say, you'll have had your tea. So it's a little more austere. And it was in Edinburgh, as I was a PhD student at in a cognitive science PhD program, where I started to work with psychology, on artificial intelligence, on linguistics, on various sorts of things, that I developed more of the scientific side that I've continued to generate later in my career and thinking. But Edinburgh was, because it was full of rather sophisticated Edinburgh folk, they would not necessarily have just milk chocolate. They would think of themselves as sophisticates who would have dark chocolate. It was the years where one would try to imitate one's teachers, one's professors, wearing tweed jackets and drinking espresso and probably having dark chocolate and trying to be a very sophisticated fellow. And so we're going to try a bar which is halfway between the warmth and milkiness of Glasgow and the severity of Edinburgh. And this bare bones, as it's called, this bare bones is a dark milk. So it really is a milk chocolate, but with a lot of dark chocolate in there too. We're going up to 60% of cocoa solids here. And dark milk, as it suggests, is a halfway house. But what I want us to do this time is look for another use of smell. We talked about smell and memory and smell and place. Now we want to explore the way in which smell contributes to our ability to taste things. So I'm going to ask you to take a piece of chocolate in your fingers, and with your other hand, I want you to pinch your nose tightly shut. Now, so that I can point things, I'm going to use my nice medical nose clip. So you have to pinch your nose really tightly shut, as though you're about to plunge underwater, because we don't want any air in there at all. So you're going to take a little breath, pop the chocolate in your mouth, holding your nose tightly shut, and chew on it. Okay, we ready? Off we go. As you chew, you'll get the texture for sure, get some sweetness, undoubtedly. But what does the chocolate actually taste like? Now release your nose. And now it comes in slightly slowly, but you now have the combination of the odors coming from your mouth up to the nose at that passage at the back of the nose in the nasal cavity. And that's retronasal olfaction. There are two sources of smell. Orthonasal olfaction is when we breathe in odors from the outside world. And retronasal olfaction is where we have odors that go from the foods or liquids in our mouths up to the nose, through the back of the throat, and then you breathe out through the nose. And notice now, close your mouth and breathe out, and you will intensify that chocolatey flavor that you're getting alongside the sweetness that the tongue provided. So a huge amount of what we call tasting is, of course, due to smell. It's really due to smell. If you look at what the tongue does provide, it really provides very little. It provides salt, sweet, sour, bitter, umami, the fifth taste, the meatiness of soy or of mushrooms. And that's all the tongue can provide. So everything else that you taste, all the fruity, meaty flavors, these are all coming from the nose, and the way in which odors that you have in your mouth are pulsed up to the nose when you swallow. You're sending those odors up there. Now, what do people get from this chocolate? Let's now do our tasting. If you got your Mentimeter.
Yep.
Tobacco.
On it.
Tobacco, great. Cherry, wonderful. Yes, that little honey note, I get that. Raisins. Ashy.
So I have a question for people here. This is definitely a pretty serious dark milk.
Black treacle. That's a terrific description, by the way. I'm wholly down with whoever said black treacle. That's wonderful.
Who would have guessed, though, if you hadn't been told this was a dark milk, that it is actually a milk on its initial taste? I think by the end of the taste, you definitely do get the fact that it's a dark milk. But I mean, hats off to the Glaswegians. And while everybody's sort of like enjoying and savoring this bar, I have a question for you, Barry, now on the difference between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So what I've never understood is why Glasgow has all the great restaurants and all the great museums too. I mean, it's got the Burrell, it's got the ubiquitous chip shop, it's got, everything sort of, Alistair Gray's, all his great stuff. So, and yet we sort of, we all joke about Glasgow as being awful for food, but actually it's amazing for food.
Now, Glasgow's always had a culture of eating out and dining out. In fact, what people don't realize is that Glasgow had more in common with continental Europe. They were more Italian and Parisian in a way. They liked to go to cafes, they liked to be in bars and pubs, they liked to eat out in restaurants. Plus, money is sloshed around in Glasgow in a way that's less true in Edinburgh. If you're a success in Edinburgh, it means you fit in without being seen. You just join the Edinburgh elite. If you're a success in Glasgow, you have to make a big splash. And equally, I think Glaswegians, instead of being famous for 15 minutes, they're rich for 15 minutes. So restaurants are always closing down, opening up. It's a very fast moving, rather kind of warm and slightly brash city. And Edinburgh is very much about respectability and gentility. However, Edinburgh is a city that exists on two levels. You have the new town, very elegant, very polished. And as you look down into these streets that lie beneath, sometimes under the bridges across some of the streets, into the Grassmarket, the Cowgate, the Gallowgate, that was the wilder, rougher part of town. And it seems to symbolize the Scottish character. Genteel respectability on the outside, and then the seething, passionate, dark, uncontrolled element inside. And quite a lot of the people who were respectable by day would go down into the bars and the pubs at night and cavort. And very famously, Deacon Brodie, who was a church member and respectable member of society, would go down into the Grassmarket and the Gallowgate, and he would give keys to some of the big houses to thieves and robbers. And he got caught finally, and he was hung on a gallows of his own design, Deacon Brodie. And I think it's not surprising that Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Jekyll and Hyde, lived in Edinburgh, and he could represent these two sides of the Scottish character, always at war with each other. So it's an interesting city, Edinburgh, even though I think Glasgow is a warmer and a friendlier city. But Glasgow's great grassroots culture. Scottish ballet is there, great orchestras, many art galleries. BBC was there, BBC Scotland. So yes, it's Two great cities, they're only 44 miles apart, but there were some people who'd never gone to the other one, which shows you the extent of the rivalry.
This is definitely a great example of a Glaswegian chocolate, because we've got more and more depth to this one coming out. And in fact, one of the things which we debated, and you were definitely right about this, is that before we decided the order of some of the chocolates and everything, you were very keen to actually have the chocolate which is actually coming from the next place we're going to go to, which is San Francisco and Berkeley, where you went to, before we have the slightly more sophisticated Glaswegian bare bones chocolate. And I think what it does go to show is that milk makes chocolate incredibly moreish, but if you sort of look at what we were all sort of getting out of this, it's fairly, it is fairly in your face. Whereas what's sort of happening, what you've managed to sort of evoke with the bare bones is way, way, way more complexity of different flavors.
And there are levels to it. That's right. And things come slowly and they develop.
Yeah,
I think
that's a bit more about in a minute, aren't we?
Also, San Francisco.
Next.
San Francisco is also very interesting because San Francisco, where I ended up as a visitor at University of California, Berkeley, San Francisco, you can see across the bay from the Berkeley campus here in the Berkeley Hills. It's a city built on very steep streets, and quite a lot of Glasgow is built like that too. There were bits of San Francisco that did remind me a lot of Glasgow, but here you're looking at the Berkeley, the Campanile, the Berkeley Tower, and you've got a view of both bridges from these two shots. So on the shot on your left, you see the Bay Bridge, which comes to the Berkeley side from the city, from San Francisco. It's a bridge in two parts, and it also has a top and a bottom. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember or have gone back to look at the film The Graduate, you will remember Dustin Hoffman driving his open-top car across this bridge to get to Berkeley when he's seeking his true love, who's at university. And every time that was shown in any of the Berkeley theaters, they would all laugh uproariously because he's driving the wrong way on the bridge, because you went on the top to San Francisco and on the bottom coming to Berkeley. And they, for filming reasons, they had reversed this. They didn't want him hidden away. But on the other side, on the right-hand side, you're looking at the Golden Gate Bridge. So you've got these two magnificent bridges in the Bay Area. And I was in Berkeley for quite a lot of time and got used to things Californian, wonderful state. But what I never got used to was the choice of chocolate. And if we look at what most Americans, even in sophisticated places like the Bay Area, most of them thought of as the chocolate of their childhood, it would be a Hershey bar. Now, I'm sure many of you have tried Hershey bars. Very distinctive flavor. Any of you care to describe some of the tastes of Hershey bar?
Oh yes, we've got people who sort of, you know, are very articulate with their sense of smell.
Yeah.
And actually, they picked up two of the key things that you will get.
Yes.
Whenever you properly look at an ingredients. Well, actually, one of them you're going to get. One of the things that we are always very keen on trying to get people to do, and the vomit is very good, and it is quite right. I'm not quite sure what Burke is, but whatever it is, I presume it's a sort of another expression like that. So the waxy is one of the interesting remarks. So one of the things that we always get people to do whenever they have a bar of chocolate in front of them is to look at the ingredients, because the ingredients tell you a huge amount about chocolate. One of the things that you should always look out for is just the simplicity of the ingredients. So if you pick up your bar of bare bones and you sort of look at the ingredients, you'll basically sort of see cocoa beans, raw unrefined cane sugar, cocoa butter, and a bit of milk. Now, if you look at what's on a Hershey bar, it goes on for about 4 or 5 lines, and it contains such delightful ingredients as things like PGPR. So if you see PGPR on an ingredient list, be extremely wary, because it's going to be incredibly waxy. It's a relatively modern emulsifier, which is used to stop the machines gumming up and to stop it melting in very hot temperatures. But that's what gives it the waxiness. But the other one, which is sort of slightly more bizarre, is that to us in Europe, we definitely, and this is not said to beat up on Americans, because if we had more Americans here, they would maybe describe the flavor of a Hershey bar as being maybe a little bit tangy, or sometimes acrid. But to us in Europe, it's definitely vomit. And the reason for that is very much that what you're basically getting is butyric acid. Now, Barry, do you want to do the honors on butyric acid? Or
Yes, so butyric acid is one of those ingredients. If you combine it with isovaleric acid, it really is the smell of vomit, but it's also the smell in Parmesan cheese. So these are rather ambiguous odors. If you think of them as Parmesan cheese, especially think of those cheesy delis with the checkered tablecloth and a little ramekin with Parmesan cheese that's already been grated and it's been there for rather too long and seen too many customers before you. If you put your nose near it, you'll get the smell of butyric acid and a bit of isovaleric acid. So it can be a food odor, but it really has the smell of rancidness of vomit. And indeed, it's one of the odors that you would get where you're smelling the real thing. So people are used to that. They maybe don't find it too obnoxious, but it's definitely there. So vomit, and I think the term you weren't able to follow, if I got it rightly, was onomatopoeic. It was brrk.
Ah, okay, I've got it. It's not the dragon. But so the story behind why they add butyric acid is sort of that there are sort of lots of different stories. Hershey basically claimed it's because it was the only way he could transport the milk from the cows, which were a long way away, to the factory. But what we think it may well be also is that, I mean, the people who invented milk chocolate was Daniel Peter, who doesn't get much credit for it, but Nestle, who gets a lot of the credit for it, probably a little bit unfairly. And what he worked out how to do was to make desiccated milk powder, dried milk powder. But what he did do with that was that he also worked out that you should pasteurize the milk before you put it in there. But Hershey's saw what Lindt, Conching, and we'll talk more about that later, was doing, but he also worked out a little bit more about what was going on with the milk. And I think what actually probably did happen was that Hershey just didn't realize that you were supposed to stop the lipidolysis in the milk before you added it to the chocolate. And by the time you realized what it was on, the Americans got hooked on this sort of slightly tangy and acrid flavor. But anyway, it's a good example of why you should read the label, and we'll talk a bit more about that one as we go through.
There were many better things in the Bay Area than that, but I can't tell you them all, apart from developing my love of Californian wines alongside French wines. So.
Which we will come on to in a sec. But I think before then, we should talk a little bit about fast food culture and what happened to that. Because the other thing which this brings us on to is, and this is sort of why we're so passionate in craft chocolate, is basically because one of the strange things is that you can basically either have foods which are like roast chicken, where basically you go out and you buy the chicken and you season it and you cook it, or you can have foods which are like chicken nuggets, where you basically buy something which has been pre-prepared and pre-packaged, and you take it out the freezer and you put it in the oven and you cook it, and Bob's your uncle. And it's very simple, much quicker, much easier. But there are some differences between the two. I'm sure that most of you will probably be able to list what is in a chicken nugget, but just in case you can't, what you basically do is you take any bit of the chicken you want. And it can be the slurry, it can be the breast. You grind it down into a powder, then you desiccate it. Then you will add it to various food additives. There's flavoring agents, various stabilizers, various emulsifiers, lots of palm oil, lots of soy oil, lots of other stuff. And you will now be saying, well, why are we talking about chicken nuggets when we're talking about chocolate? And the reason for this is actually quite simple. It's because most chocolate that we consume is actually remarkably similar to chicken nuggets. And some of it, however, is more like roast chicken. So just as a sort of quick game, what we'd love you now just to try and do is just, you've got 6 chocolates in front of you. What we'd love you to just quickly do is now go to menti.com and just basically just say which of these are made like a roast chicken. And then on the other hand, which of these are made like a chicken nugget, where you basically take it out of the oven, it's already been all prepared for you, and you basically throw it back into the oven and cook it. And that's basically what happens with kubacha. So we've got some people who probably played this game a few times before because they're doing very well on it. And we've got some other people who are being a little bit kinder to us and helping us out a bit. Prestat, in case you don't know what it is the one that the Queen Mother really likes too. So it's this one, if you've seen it. It's very expensive. It's about like £8 or £9 a bar. Okay, I think what we probably need to do now is just sort of give you the quick answers. So you've all had Tcho, and you all know that even though you actually have one of their sweeter, more entry-level bars, you know, that's 39% cacao. These guys actually go out to the jungle with small production lines and roasting ovens and the sort of lentil grinders which you use to conch the chocolate, and actually show the farmers what different fermentations make. Prestat is the Queen Mother, or the ex-Queen Mother, the old Queen Mother's rather, favorite chocolate. But unfortunately, it's actually owned by an Italian company called Illy, who make coffee, and it's really chicken nuggets through and through. They don't make their own chocolate at all. Bonat, awesome guys. If you're ever in France and down in Varennes, go and see them. Green and Blacks, sorry, it's definitely chicken nuggets. Hotel Chocolat may well be British sources, but they never make their own chocolate. There are tiny amounts of it. There is Duffy, amazing guy, definitely makes his own chocolate. The one thing we would urge you to do, and this is thanks to Barry, we've sort of learned more about this stuff, is just look at the ingredients, because what you will discover in most cases when you look at the ingredients of a bar of chocolate like this is don't look at the front, look at the back. And once you've got the ingredients, you'll know that you really shouldn't be eating that stuff because it looks just like a chicken nugget. And then the other things you should look for, and these are relatively important, are basically look for where the beans come from. So you can look as long as you like at this stuff or at this stuff, and you will never figure out where the beans come from. Eventually, we actually have worked out where the beans come from this now. They do come from Côte d'Ivoire, from a good co-ops there. So that's actually a lot better. These guys will never tell you that. And that's basically because of historical accidents that we can tell you about in another talk. And then the other thing, of course, is that if you ever see the word Belgium on a tin of biscuits or on a sort of, box of chocolates, just put it back. Belgium is terrible in the world of chocolate. I know they think they're great. The only thing they've ever really done for chocolate is invent the concept of chicken nuggets, aka kubacha. So just don't go there. Right, let's go back to the next step, which you hinted at earlier on, was basically you got into wine not first in Glasgow, but more in California, and then really France is where it all happened.
It is, and the reason for going to France for 2 years was also partly wine related, partly professional. So I had my university lectureship position at Berkeley, at Birkbeck, University of London. And during that time, I visited Berkeley. I also visited Simon Fraser in Canada. And the thing that used to be said to me by colleagues and quite senior colleagues in Birkbeck was, you're always on the way to the airport. And I always thought that what made it bearable to be in one place for so long was having these spells elsewhere. But eventually they nailed me down, and I had to do several long years as a head of department and head of school, lots of work, lots of administration. And at the end of that, I was given a year's leave as reward. And I thought, well, best not to stay in London and have my successor constantly asking me how things were done and asking for help. I should get myself away, but I should be near enough within reach. I thought, why not Paris? And I had several friends in Paris who said, come. And I became a visiting professor at the École Normale Supérieure, Normale Sup, in the Rue d'Ulm. And you look down the Rue d'Ulm, as you see on the right-hand side, and you see the Panthéon, and you think, what a great city, a city that honors its great writers and thinkers and puts them in this building, in the Pantheon. And I lived in and around the Quartier Latin, the Latin Quarter, the 5th arrondissement. And at that time, I had a project to do, because I had just finished my spell of being head of department when I put on a conference at the Institute of Philosophy with my philosopher and friend Tim Crane. And we had a conference on wine and philosophy. And I remember when I said to him, I want a conference on wine and philosophy, he said, oh, very good, very good. You are joking, aren't you? And I said, no. I want there to be a conference where we bring people from the wine trade and we bring philosophers, and we talk about the nature of taste and tasting, and whether tastes are objective or subjective, and how we taste things. And we will also know how wines are made. And we subtitled the conference From Science to Subjectivity, because there's a huge amount of science that goes into making a beautiful wine, just as there's a lot of science and technique and craft that goes into making a great chocolate, but it's all in the service of producing an experience in us. And so from going from what are the materials, what is the processing, what is the understanding of how to treat them, it's all in the service of giving you an experience, a subjective experience, but not subjective in the sense that it doesn't give you information about what you're tasting, but that you are a subject. It's happening to you in your subjective consciousness. And so I thought, this is a perfect example of the mind-body problem, or the world-mind problem. So I was taken with this, had the conference, and at the end of this conference on philosophy of wine held in Senate House, I was delighted because the philosophers said, oh, that really was philosophy. And I learned something about wine. And people from the wine trade said, you were really, you know, good at being accurate about what we were talking about in you know, knowledgeably about wine, but we learned a bit of philosophy. And I thought, that's fine. And so as a result of that, I was asked by publishers, the conference was written up in the Financial Times, as I remember, and I was asked by publishers, would I collect the papers and produce a volume? And that's what I was doing when I was in Paris. And it became Questions of Taste, the Philosophy of Wine, and you see the book in the bottom left-hand corner. And on the cover, I wanted this particular painting on the cover. It's one of the Scottish colorists, and this is Bunty Cadell, who painted that. And I wanted the University of Glasgow, who owned the painting, could you tell me whether I can have permission to use it? They said, well, you have to write to the family. And I wrote to his niece and I said, can we have this painting, please, for the cover of the book about wine, philosophy and wine? And she said, yes, if you pay me a small sum of money. Bunty loved a drink and Bunty would have been so happy to be there. So I'm very glad that we have Bunty's painting. And that's what I was spending some of my time doing while I was in Paris. I was also really becoming much more knowledgeable about wine and traveling to Burgundy. And that was all due to a philosopher who I met there, who became subsequently a colleague, Ophelia Derrois. And Ophelia Derrois was the deputy director of the Institute of Philosophy and is now a professor of philosophy and neuroscience at LMU in Munich. And as a philosopher, she came along to my talk. I think she was a graduate student then. She came along to some seminars I was giving. And we said, shall we continue discussing? Shall we go and have a drink after the seminar? We went to a wine bar, and of course, being rather presumptuous and assuming, I thought, I will order the wine. And so I produced a couple of glasses, and Ophelia immediately looked at it, put it to her nose, thought for a very long time, and then said, Pruneau, un peu réglisse, a bit of prune, a bit of licorice. And I thought, oh my God, you really are a good taster. And in fact, she's one of the best tasters I know. She's got a fantastic nose, can spend at least 10 minutes smelling the wine before she'll ever taste it. And she will nail all of the aromas that you're picking off there. And it turned out that Ophelia had contacts with people in the wine trade in Paris, and they had contacts with people in Burgundy. And so we spent a lot of joyful time going down to visit Burgundy, meeting winemakers. And when people ask me how I know about wine, there are two reasons. First, my father had a restaurant. He was originally in Glasgow and then moved to Edinburgh. But he had a restaurant, and I was always given rather good bottles at home, very different from the things I drank as a student. And then secondly, this experience of being in Burgundy and going to meet the winemakers. And I've learned everything I know from winemakers, not from books and not from wine critics, but from the winemakers themselves. If you go and have a visit to a domain, always make an appointment, go along, and they will look at you in a very shy way and say, would you like to taste our wines? And the best thing to say is, well, shall we have a look around the winery first? And then you ask them, why do you make it in this way? Why are you using stainless steel tanks? Do you prefer this to making it in oak and in barrel and so on? You will learn a lot. And by the end of the time, instead of tasting 2 or 3 wines, they bring out several and say, compare this, try this. This is what I did in 2003. It's not as good as it was in 2002. And you will learn a lot. So this was my Paris time. And then we go to the next slide. As well as meeting Ophelia Derrois, I had a terribly important meeting for my subsequent research and career when attending a talk at a conference. I think the conference was on frames of reference, and there was a very lively, clever Englishman called Charles Spence, who was giving a talk about the connections between sound and vision and the cross-modal effects of one on another. And I thought this was a great talk, and I wanted to ask him questions about it. And the thing about our French colleagues, they're lovely, but on a Friday evening, they will not wait and have a drink with you, or certainly not take you to dinner after the seminar. They rush home to their families. So there was this poor Englishman in Paris with nowhere to go. So I took him to Le Rostand, this cafe opposite the Luxembourg Gardens, and we sat there drinking and drinking, and we sat there for 4 or 5 hours, drinking, and I think eventually eating, as I quizzed him about multisensory experience, multisensory perception. And it turned out that he had an interest in flavour, and that one of his co-authors, Malika Ovray, who had been known to me as a researcher visiting École Normale Supérieure and Institut Jean Nicot, she had co-written a wonderful paper on the multisensory perception of flavour. And when I suddenly discovered this, that was a friendship and a collaboration that has been strong and that's remained there for a long time. And I knew when I got back to London that I needed to completely revise my thinking about perception and the senses. First of all, that we don't just have 5 senses, and also that the senses do not work independently of each other. There's always crosstalk. They're always influencing each other. And Charles and I went on and worked on several things together. And Malika Ovray, Charles and I wrote a paper confusing taste and flavor. And that was based on the fact that people think of taste as something that they get from the tongue, and that everything they're tasting is from the tongue. Whereas, of course, what we call taste is usually a combination, as you saw, of smell, touch, and taste. And we call that, and sensory scientists call that, flavor. And I decided I'm going to work a lot on flavor. So very important time for me.
And you also got not just into wine, but you got a little bit into chocolate. So we picked this one for you. And maybe you want to sort of get us to play a few little games with this one as we go through it as well.
Yes. So as I began to, I mean, I had been writing a little bit about wine in the press, and there I was, and even some philosophy articles about taste, and prosing on about tasting wine and about taste.
And
then I thought, how does taste actually work? And it was when I talked to my colleagues in psychology and neuroscience, they said, oh, it's very complicated, enormous numbers of things going on. That really revolutionized my way of thinking. And I want us now to sort of explore that journey with a little bit of an exercise we're going to do with the Bonnat, this beautiful French chocolate. So if we take a piece, what I want you to do is we're going to try eating fast and slow, but we're going to try slow first, because I believe that what you taste depends on how you taste. So it's not simply a question of, do you get it or do you not? We pop things in our mouths, we chew, we sit, we swallow, and we think we've got everything. But actually, a lot of things are happening very quickly, and it's possible to miss what's going on. It's possible to fail to notice things. A good wine or a good chocolate does not give up all its secrets all at once. And so I want us to dwell on the way we might explore it. And so first thing I'm going to ask you to do is take a small piece, just a single piece, small enough that you can do this exercise. And I want you to put it into your mouth, and I want you not to chew it. I want you just to have it in there and let it melt. So you can move it around your mouth, but don't chew, don't bite. And at first, you're trebly aware of the shape, and then you may get that cooling sensation that somebody put up first of all. Now, when you're tasting, very smooth, notice texture is important. It goes from being this hard lump of Lego to something that's now very soft, very velvety, very smooth. But it has to get there because it melts. And of course, it's the heat of your tongue and your mouth that are melting the chocolate. And the melt rate is very indicative of the quality of the chocolate and the amount of cocoa solid in it. Commercial chocolate it's melting in your fingers almost before you get it in your mouth. Here, you need to melt and release the cocoa butter and the cocoa solids. Now, as you're eating it, that cooling sensation is because your tongue is transferring its heat to the chocolate for it to melt, and that leaves your tongue colder than it was, and it seems to give you this illusion that there's a coolness to the chocolate. So it's actually a physiological effect. What do people get? Perhaps are we able to ask people to give their descriptions of this chocolate?
We should be able to now.
So it goes from having very little taste to, once it melts, I get sweetness. Tea, wonderful description. Biscuity, yeah, I get that. Coconut, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Buttery, super buttery. And notice that chocolate truffles give you that cooling sensation. You have to melt them and you get that feeling of butteriness there too. Honey and raisins, yeah. Silky. Citrus, so somebody more acutely aware of the little bit of acidity in there, and it's certainly there. Smooth, caramel, slow melt. Hay, but in a good way. Hay's a wonderful description. I love that. I absolutely get that. Again, notice some people will say to me, oh, when you're tasting wine with me, I only get these notes once you've mentioned them. So I'm probably suggestible. You're planting them in my head. I don't think that's true. I think if you are, a taster who really pays attention, when other people notice things you haven't noticed and they're good and they're accurate, you say, ooh, absolutely. And as you're putting things up, multi, prunes and so on, as you're putting them up, I'm thinking, yeah, I get what those notes are, what those flavor parts are that you're describing. So I think this is why I think tasting together is good, because there are many things going on quickly and you don't notice them all. And people are just giving you another pair of eyes, another perspective. You're all finding things, and very often we benefit from having more things drawn to our attention. So, right, that was the eating slowly, and thank you for those descriptions. Now, by contrast, second part, we're going to eat fast. So what I want you to do here, I want you to do this. If you're doing this with someone else, you can put your hand up as soon as you finish. But what we're going to do is we're going to pop this in our mouths. We're going to chew and swallow as fast as we can, as quick as we can, and swallow it. Okay. So this is going to be try and swallow this, and put your hand up when you're finished. If you're with someone, it's a race. You ready? Okay, go. Wow, that was quick, Spencer.
I've done this a few times.
You have.
But I as people are sort of going to describe this, I mean, one of the things which occurs to me is that unless you're colorblind, most people are pretty good at identifying colors and being able to describe it in words which other people can describe.
Yeah.
See, slightly different with music, but we've sort of got a basic vocab to be able to sort of do that. We're trained. You can do pitch, rhythm, frequency, etc. Flavor, I think, is just a completely different ball game. I mean, unless you have people like yourself, or and we're going to talk a bit more about the work that James Hoffman and Rebecca Palmer,
yes, or the people we have. But look, what I want to point out to you is that fewer things happen, and it's taking you longer to notice things. So you get fruitier or you get acidic, but look how many more descriptions were offered. If you do it quickly, you get creamy or you get bitter or but you don't get as much, because it really is about taking time to let one thing happen after another. And this is what we call the great wave of chocolate tasting. As Spencer said, Spencer and I, James Hoffman and Rebecca Palmer, sudden lapse of
must be the wine, because she's the wine person.
I know she's a master of wine, so I should not be forgetting that. But so Rebecca and James and Spencer and I, we noticed that when you're tasting, anything of interest. It's not a single event. It's a little sequence of events. There's a temporal sequence. One thing happens, then another, then another. And that what you need to do is you need to slow down to pay attention to what's happening and in what order. And we call this the wave, the flavor wave, because the first thing you have is texture. There's just this block, and then it needs to melt, and you notice if it's rough or if it's smooth. You notice if it's creamy. You might even notice coolness, and then as it's melted, it releases tastes. So you'll get some sourness or acidity. You'll get some bitterness if it's there. You'll get some sweetness if it's there. And then as more of the volatiles are coming out of the substance with the heat and the mixture with saliva, as they escape and as they rise from the back of the throat up through the nasal cavity to the receptors at the epithelium up here, then you get flavor, and you get the fruity, the raisiny, the treacle, those extra notes. So ideally, what we would have people do is we would have them, and that's what the sheet that you saw, it's on the screen and you have one, is to, with the bars, later, I think it would be a good exercise for you to try for your own self-discovery, to try each of the chocolates and to note in order, what's the texture you get, what's the taste you get, what are the flavors you get, and also whether you like the bars or not. And it may turn out that the particular sequence of what happens when and where and in which combinations, when you look down through liking, you'll see, oh, there's my flavor profile, my flavor wave, the things that I like in that sequence. And you can do this with wines, you can do it with chocolate, and it's a great thing to do.
And if you do discover a series of attributes, well, actually just send us in the sheets after, just take a picture of them and just send this in to us, because we've actually tried to sort of develop a recommendation engine off the back of it, so that if you tell us, we can identify some of the attributes that you're enjoying. So for example, if you like sort of bright, berry-like chocolates, we can predict that you will probably like Madagascan beans for the most part. And in particular, you know, whether they're pristine or whether they're buttery, then we'll be able to sort of tell if you like American Madagascan bean interpretations or if you're going to like the French ones. And actually, I'm going to make a quick plug here, because thanks to you, Barry, one of the books that I've sort of been reading this year, which I think is absolutely brilliant on this, is something called Smellosophy, which I had no idea actually the complexity and just the richness and the history that there is to be, you know, just read about. I mean, it is extraordinary to me that, you know, for 300 or 400 years, thanks to Newton, we've all been able to agree on what different colors are, but we just don't have this with flavor yet. And I mean, if you want a good history and you want a good understanding of actually where we sit with smell and with flavor, I cannot recommend sort of Smellosophy highly enough.
Smellosophy by Anne-Sophie Barwich.
Again, got a nice red cover too, which is always good, because then I can find it.
Another philosopher and friend and guide to smell, philosopher, friend and guide, and wonderful, wonderful book. So do go out and read that.
But so anyway, let's move on to, because this is Chercher la Femme. This is, I shouldn't be probably saying that, but anyway, this is your Brazilian adventures.
Yes, it's always, why do people go to Brazil and spend a lot of time and settle for a while in Brazil? It's always Chercher la Femme, but we will pass over that.
Okay.
So I did spend a lot of time in Brazil. Most of the time I wanted to spend in Rio because it's the most extraordinary city. Nothing quite prepares you to see the sights and have the smells. These mountains that just rise out of the sea. It's a extraordinary place, Rio. Very dangerous place. I was nearly shot and killed there, but people said, "Oh, you've had your Rio experience. That's fine." All other Brazilians said that's fine. But instead, I found myself most of the time down in the south of the country, Rio Grande do Sul, in Porto Alegre. And people from Porto Alegre think that people from Rio are ridiculous. They think they're so crazy, they're too noisy, they're cariocas, they're absurd. And in fact, in Rio Grande do Sul, there was a radio program about Rio Grande do Sul having become a comedy program about it having become an independent country. And they used to talk about the Brazilians, by which they meant people in the north in Rio and Sao Paulo. But anyway, in Rio, I met a chocolate maker, Samantha Akim, And Samantha was a patisserie chef who turned to making chocolate and was the person who first explained to me the long process of making chocolate and her desire to convert people to eventually to 100% chocolate. And she knew you had to get them there slowly. They would have to have higher and higher percentages. And she said to me, what do you think of when you think of 100% chocolate? And I said, something incredibly bitter and sour. And she said, that's because the cocoa is not good, and you have to make sure it's from a single origin, that it's properly made, fermented, dried, and so on. So I became aware of that system, and therefore I had a little bit, not much, but a little bit of experience when I met Spencer and was able to try and show that I could tell what he was talking about, and I was very proud of that. But in the south, you're in, so there are three places here. We've got Rio, and below it, you've got Salvador, which is an extraordinary place, very ancient part of the Portuguese colonial buildings. And you've got these wonderful drummers who come around, and you can hear them arriving from miles away, Uladum, and the noise gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and suddenly they're all there beating drums. And then the rather more European and slightly staid and very German population driven, and Italian, Germans and Italians in Porto Alegre. And Porto Alegre and Rio Grande do Sul are near the wine producing region of Brazil. And Brazil has its own really rather good growing wine business in Pinto Bandeira and its surroundings, and they make wonderful sparkling wines. And of course, they make these sparkling wines, which they call asti, because they were like asti spumanti. They were what the Italians made in the Italian communities who came in the 1900s made there. I'm very pleased, in a book called 1001 Wines to Drink Before You Die, the second edition has the only Brazilian wine in it, and that's written by me, about a Brut Natur from that region, from Pinto Bandeira. So I'm very happy with that. But we're now going to taste a Brazilian chocolate.
A Brazilian chocolate from Bahia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that we are most keen on with chocolate is that you actually know where it comes from, that would be one of the challenges I think we have with your friend, is that we've talked to her lots of times, and if we don't know where the bar's beans come from, we won't sell it. But the great thing about this is from one of the great superstars of the chocolate world, an amazing guy called Bertil Åkesson, who his family is Swedish originally. He basically he sort of cracked his bones on chocolate really in Madagascar, but he now also has some amazing plantations down in Bahia, which is the first example of bioterrorism, actually. It's the place where they sort of released various diseases back in the 1980s and 1990s again, apparently. But he's now able to sort of get through some of those problems. And this is an interesting one because he actually sort of put some coffee nibs in it, which you will explain a little bit more about in a sec, Barry. But this is a proper great Brazilian chocolate, not quite from your wine country, but from Bahia, from one of his fazendas, and it is an awesome chocolate, I think you'll find.
So let's try it, and then we'll talk about it. So here we are with this Brazilian chocolate, and of course Bahia is for the Brazilians, it's a very special place. They have a song that they all know called "I don't want to be here, I want to be in Bahia." So it's a place they yearn for. Okay, let's try it. Let's go with and please do with your menti, just give the tasting notes that you're able to contribute. Smell it first. Wonderful chocolatey coffee aroma.
Yeah.
In we go. Gritty, yeah. Coffee for sure. Nutty. So the nutty thing I think is really interesting, because what you're actually biting into are chocolate nibs, cocoa nibs. And the cocoa nibs contribute a little bit of texture, rather as if you were having a chocolate bar with nuts in it. That's the grittiness, that's the crunchiness. They behave just like nuts. And I like Ackerson's philosophical point. He describes one of his bars as having 101% cocoa solids. And you say, wait a minute, 101, what are you talking about? And of course, he's right, because he has a bar which is 100% cocoa solid, and then he has the cocoa nibs, again, 100% from the cocoa plant. So he's entitled to his 101%, and it's that gritty, nutty character. I also wonder whether the nutty flavor of the nibs is because we really interpret them as rather like bits of nut in there, or whether they themselves are nutty. I'm never quite sure of that.
I think actually this one is a little bit nutty. I mean, the sort of woody, the earthiness. I mean, to us, this is an interesting bar because it's what we would call a bridge bar. Because one of the challenges with craft chocolate is, bluntly, most people haven't heard of Bahia, or however you pronounce it. And if they sort of see a chocolate from that part of the world, they just won't know what they're doing. And if they see it at like 5 or 6 pounds, they're puzzled by it. So the challenge for craft chocolate makers is, well, how do we bridge people into that? And what people like Bertil do is they put ingredients that you recognize and you think you may like coffee in it. Or there are some great sort of Icelandic chocolate makers like Omnom, who are awesome at sort of doing things like putting barley and sort of burning their chocolate and putting it into there, or licorice into it. Or, you know, Pump Street chocolate, you know, who originally came out of bakery, makes some amazing sourdough and rye bars. And it's conglomerate rock, I think, is an awesome phrase. Whoever came up with that one is just absolutely brilliant on it. The astringency is an interesting point, because we're going to come on to that one in a sec. Dirt, I think, is interesting. I mean, it does not have the bright fruity notes that Bertil's bars from Madagascar has, and it doesn't sort of have the creamy notes that you sometimes get from his barley bars. Burnt, smoky, yep, you could definitely argue that. And he crafts his bars in France. He often gets Francois Palu to help him in the crafting, and they have a tendency to sort of go more on the roasted side. But it's awesome that you're sort of getting these.
Coffee grounds, I think, is very good too, because that's almost something that it's imaginative, almost rather like a Greek or Turkish coffee, when you sip too far and you get the sand in your mouth and it's grounds. But that's good. And I also think, whoever said cinnamon, it's not as though it's exactly got the taste of cinnamon, but boy, does it have the character of something with cinnamon in it.
Musky.
Yeah.
Musky. But I think, again, the great thing about tasting with one another, tasting different chocolates, is that you can articulate the flavors that you're getting, and that helps you to remember them. And I also think to appreciate them more and figure out what you want more of as you're going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to be in Bahia with Bertil Ackerson for sure to make this. And of course, coffee, we know that coffee, lots and lots of coffee is produced in Brazil, lots of coffee is produced in Colombia as well.
And it also used to be, you know, Brazil used to be huge for chocolate until Witch's Broom was brought in. And I'm not kidding about this bioterrorist argument. It is arguably one of the first places that ever suffered from bioterrorism in the 1980s, 1990s, and it's still an ongoing case. But I think we now ought to move to one of your signature dishes, as we'd say.
Yes. Okay. So now you should have a little bit of the pralus, this tiny little bar, and we're now going to look at another contributor, multisensory contributor to flavor perception. Some of you have mentioned it before, but we're going to try. So here we are, 100%. Try a little bit of it at first, and then see what you make of it. So we're really stepping up to 100% cocoa solids, but I want you to concentrate on what's happening to you. What does it do to you as you eat it? So off we go. And take your time and let it melt and dissolve in the mouth. Do provide descriptions if you wish.
Actually, we don't have the. Oh no, I'm sorry. I think
we don't have. Okay.
What is this?
Okay. But this is maybe, yeah. If you go to that face, this is maybe what some of you are getting. So,
you sure you don't have this chocolate in your pack?
No.
I'm sorry about that.
No.
I mean, if you write to us afterwards, we will get you some sent. I'm very sorry. Okay.
So we were looking to see when we came up against astringency. It's not the most astringent. If we'd had the other one, we would have had it absolutely.
If you have a Menacao or something, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Menacao will give you it with bells on. So when you find something astringent, it's that sensation where your mouth seems to dry and your mouth seems to pucker, and you get the squeaky teeth feeling. And a lot of people say, oh, very bitter taste. But strangely, it's not bitterness per se, it's really a sensation of touch. So astringency is a feel, not a taste. Although it's very easy to confuse it with bitterness, and it tends to, astringency tends to accentuate bitterness and sourness. So what's actually happening, you get astringency as a response to tannins in red wine, you get it to tannins in green tea, you get it with stewed rhubarb or with some dark chocolates. And of course, it's due to the same thing, it's the polyphenols. And the polyphenols are coming from the plant, and they are doing something in particular. Polyphenols are coagulating the protein in your saliva and making it less slippery. So it's a friction issue. You actually need the mouth to be in movement to get this sensation. When you've got a very tannic red wine and you have a mouthful of it, you think, and it's usually towards the finish, you get that tightening up, the drying sensation, the kind of squeaky teeth feeling. And people say, oh, I don't like that taste. And you say, well, it's not a taste, it's a touch, because take a mouthful of the wine and hold it completely still in your mouth. Do you get that taste? No. But when you swallow, when it's moving, when you get friction across the surfaces, that's when you feel it. And so one of the things that you can do that we've discovered, and this is a strange thing to do, but if you take another piece of this pralus, just a little bit of it, take a bite. And what we're going to do is, if you've got it handy, having a coffee bean, now I don't know if any of you had this in the instructions, but if you eat a coffee bean and you chomp on it at the same time as eating the chocolate softens enormously. It now no longer has any of those aggressive notes. What you notice is it's cooler, creamier, fruitier. And the same is true of a tannic red wine. When you've got a wine that's Sagrantino or a young Bordeaux, something with very aggressive tannins, chew on a coffee bean, sip the wine. It won't destroy the flavor of the wine. Instead, what you'll get is a feeling that the wine has lost that tannin, completely resolved, and it seems fruitier. You're able to taste more flavors. And that, I think, is a kind of illusion, because remember, people think of astringency as bitterness, although it's not really bitterness, not a taste. And so when you have a coffee bean, which ups the bitterness, the brain assumes all the bitterness is with the coffee and then draws it away from, and maybe even migrates it to the coffee pieces, and leaves you thinking, what else is left in the remainder of this, this chocolate or wine? So that's what you can do. I gave this effect to the guys at the Fat Duck Experimental Kitchen, and they started trying to mix coffee and wine and all sorts of things to see. But I think you actually need to chew on it. You need to have that separation of your brain deciding which of the aggressive tastes go with the coffee bean and which go with the chocolate or the wine. And then it's not a surprise that we like, and indeed people buy heaps of chocolate covered coffee beans. Quite a nice thing to do. Very good combinations. I hope this helps to explain why. So shall we go on, Spencer?
I think we should, but I do want to just pick up on the chat, because there's been some great, I'm just sort of noting them down. I think all the people who are picking up sort of the sort of the fruity, the lemony, the citrusy, that is the classic Madagascan bean from Sambarano Valley. These beans actually come from Bertil Larkison's plantation in Bijofo, and what you're picking up there is absolutely brilliant. And the people who are getting yogurt, I've never thought about that before, but you are absolutely right. I mean, again, it is this sort of it is what fascinates me, is it is so difficult to articulate flavour. And I'm looking forward to sort of Barry and Sophie actually sort of giving me my Newtonian spectrum on what we're going to do. But anyway, let's move on. Right, now you come back to London. We don't really come back. You come to London, to this sort of august building where you've got the most extraordinary room because you designed, well, give the story as to how you actually have sort of kept the facilities, because it's amazing.
Yes. So we had an Institute of Philosophy, and once I had discovered, working with Charles Spence and others, and Colin Blakemore and neuroscientists, that we had many different senses. They were all working independently, but also collaboratively to produce the experiences we had. I thought we really need to start again. We need to stop thinking we have 5 senses: touch, taste, smell, sight, sound, and they all work independently. So I decided we were going to expand our modest facilities. Philosophers usually need an office, a desk, computer, and that's it, and maybe some administrative help. But we decided, no, we're going to expand, and we have some very lovely facilities in Stuart House, which is just abutting the back of Senate House here. And we have 2 working labs in there, and we created 2 working labs so that we could have a center for the study of the senses. And this is a center that pioneers collaborative research between philosophers, psychologists, neuroscientists. And we've worked with perfumers and artists and filmmakers and chefs and people in chocolate makers. We worked in all sorts of places because people are fascinated by the way their senses are working to deliver the experiences they're having. And we want to work with people who are making wonderful products, and we know they work, and we know that they're very effective. And then we want to kind of reverse engineer. So how are we able to extract the complexity and interest of what's been made in this beautiful way? How can we unpick the workings of the brain that's put it together into a single whole experience? And so that was the Center for the Study of the Senses, which well,
actually, this to me is the Center for the Study of the Senses. This thing gives me a headache whenever I walk into your office.
Yes,
I can't really get from this picture.
So when you come into our lobby, you come upon this beautiful thing by Patrick Hughes. It's a technique he calls reverse perspective. And if you're in front of it, it moves with you. As you move to the side, it moves with you, and you move to the other side, and it moves
quite
with you.
Disorienting. You feel as if you've had a glass too many.
Yeah, and it is actually it's not flat. It is a 3-dimensional structure, but you don't realize that as you're looking at it. And as it moves, and it seems to move with you. The reason is because the pieces which are by your knowledge of perspective should be furthest away from you are actually nearer, and the pieces which should be nearer are actually further away. So you've got distance and depth information conflicting with information about perspective, and the only way the brain can make sense of this is to have an apparent motion to the object as you move. And the interesting thing, my colleague Chris Frith, neuroscientist, great neuroscientist, grandfather of cognitive neuroscience, the great thing that Chris Frith made me aware of is that people with schizophrenia don't get this effect, which is really interesting. Their prior expectations seem so fixed that they don't have that plasticity and movement between the 2 systems competing to make sense of an ambiguous figure. I also remember that when the previous Vice-Chancellor, one of our previous Vice-Chancellors, Sir Adrian Smith, brought a whole group of very eminent Chinese academics and administrators, and they wanted to see around the university, and he thought, what am I going to do? I know, I'll take them to see Barry and the Center for the Study of the Senses. And they said, oh, wow, and everyone got their cameras out, and they were amazed, they were looking at it. And I remember Adrian Smith turning to me and saying, it's the only bloody thing they'll remember. So it is quite a memorable object. And we're delighted because we had a conference run by Colin Blakemore on pictorial paradoxes, and the artist who made this, Patrick Hughes, came along and spoke and then donated this piece to the Institute. So we're very lucky to have it. It's a really wonderful thing. And Patrick Patrick has got a story, which if not true, it should be true, as to what the inspiration for reverse perspective was. He said as a child, he's in his late 70s, 80s, as a child during the war, he was with his parents in their terraced house in Leeds, and bombs were falling. And he said they used to hide under the stairs till the bombing stopped. And as a child, he would look up at the reverse of the stairs, and he looked at stairs you couldn't climb. And in the context of so much emotion and fear, it kind of burned something into his mind that made it unforgettable to him. And he created this. And we said, is that really the source of it? And he said, I don't know, but it's a good story, and I think it is. And so if it isn't true, it should be true. But
now, I think we should move on to another chocolate, which you've actually taught me to appreciate in a completely different way, because it's actually dug me into understanding more about how we get flavor out of chocolate. So we are going to go, well, actually, we're going to start, well, should we do Taza next, or should we do, well, let's do these first.
Well, let's do, let's do these first, and then we'll do Taza. So, well, actually, no, let's do Taza. Let's do Taza, because we need to move along, but let's do Taza, because this, I think we have got a chance for you to respond and describe, and I'm really interested to get your descriptions of this. Okay.
So this is a stone ground chocolate.
It's not. It is not, by the way. It does not have Bertelsmann cocoa nibs in it, but let's see.
Well, I mean, should we give the story to this? So the story to this is basically all to do with Barry's beard, or to do with beards, to be more accurate, not Barry's in particular. So what you may or may not know, as you're getting this chocolate ready and as you're tasting it, let me just quickly explain to you what this is. So we've been drinking chocolate for about 5,000 plus years. And it wasn't until about 150, 200 years ago that people started to eventually get fed up with drinking chocolate, because one of the problems with drinking chocolate is it has a lot of cocoa butter in it. And cocoa butter is amazing in the sense that it melts on your tongue and produces all these great flavors that Barry was talking about earlier on. But the other challenge with cocoa butter is that it doesn't dissolve well in water or milk. So if you're trying to make a drink, it's fine if you're in a hot climate and you drink it quickly. But if you're in, say, you know, the UK or the Netherlands, and you're drinking it and it's cold outside, what happens is the cocoa butter gets stuck in your beard as you're drinking it. And so the Dutch spent a long time trying to work out how to stop this, and they eventually came up with this idea called the cocoa press. And what you do with the cocoa press is what it sounds like on the tin. You squeeze out the cocoa butter, less of it to get stuck in the beard, less of it to sort of not be able to dissolve in the water, etc. But it's not until about 20 years after that that a guy called Joseph Fry works out somehow that if you add the cocoa butter back into the stuff you're using to make the drink, you can actually start to create chocolate bars, the first stable, solid chocolate that you can actually sort of preserve and make chocolate bars out of. Now, it's very, very different to modern chocolate, but, you know, here, give it a go, and we'll be led by Barry a bit, I think. Tell us about the taste, the flexure.
We are, but I'm going to question the authenticity of the beard story, because that story crops up in a lot of places. So Corton Charlemagne is a white Grand Cru in Burgundy. It's the only, the hill of Corton has got red Grand Cru and white Grand Cru, and it's got Corton Charlemagne, a white Burgundy. And it was supposed to be because Charlemagne was always drinking red wine and getting it on his beard, and his wife didn't like it. And so they made one of the most exceptional white wines so that his beard wouldn't get stained. So there's a lot of beard talk in food and drink.
But beer definitely does make a difference. But honestly, do try it. I mean, I'm actually now going to get you a drinking chocolate and make you drink it and then go out into the cold, because it will get stuck in your beard. If it's a good chocolate, if it's sort of, you know, Cadbury's, it's sort of, you know, going to be cocoa powder, which has got no cocoa butter in it anyhow. So it'll be completely different. But
I'll do it if we can also drink a bottle of Corton Charlemagne afterwards.
Well, we could try and the Bonnet de Martre or something like that. Yeah. Although I think after about 1,300 years, it's finally got sold out the family, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think about 2 or 3 years ago, it sort of finally left the origin. Shrapnel in a good way. That is awesome. Mouth explosion floral. So we call this a Marmite bar because it's, if you look at the descriptions on the website, 70% of people absolutely love it, and 20% of people just do not think this is anything they'd ever want to try again. We actually were doing a presentation to a well-known bank in Scotland, which you can probably guess which one it was earlier on today, and they were convinced that this is where Kendal mint cake came from, and it is remarkably similar.
Gravelly. Notice, as you all know, in these word clouds, the largest word is the word that's said most often. So gravelly and gritty, right up there, sandy, same thing. So.
But the interesting thing is here, which we're going to come back to in a sec, is that it's very much the texture which people are picking up on.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that in a sec. Now, do you want to try your experiment, Barry? Because I learned a shed load from this, which is, here we go.
Okay. So on the box, you should have these two strips. One is a very smooth strip, and the other one is a Velcro strip. So what I want you to try and do, see if it works for you, is to have a piece of Taza. So pop a piece in, start chewing and tasting it. And as you're tasting it, run your finger along the smooth, very slowly, along the smooth strip on your box, okay? Now, concentrate on the feeling and sensation in your mouth as you do that. And now move to, with the same piece of chocolate being crunched and chewed up, move to the Velcro and start rubbing it at the same time. Any difference between those two experiences? Rubbing the smooth piece and rubbing the rough piece at the same time. Do you notice any change in the way you're feeling or appreciating the taste in the mouth? So if it works, and it, yeah, sweeter with the Velcro, interesting. But a difference, a change. I definitely find it much less gritty and sandy, much smoother and finer when I'm rubbing the soft piece, and then I'm much more aware of the grit and the gravel when I'm rubbing the tough piece. Try again, see if you have any similar sensation. Yeah, yeah. So you're getting an impact, whether it's changing it for the better or for worse, you're getting an impact if you're noticing a difference. And we think that we know why that might be happening. And we think it could be, you know, since we've been children, we pick up things with our fingers and pop them into our mouth. So our fingers give us the first idea or information about what the texture is like. Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it sticky, and so on? And that's priming the brain to expect what it's going to get. You've got very sensitive fingertips. You've got very, very sensitive sensors on your tongue. And so what you're doing is biasing or changing or altering what you're expecting from touching with the fingers to it touching on the tongue. So this is just a way in which how things feel outside can affect how they feel in the mouth. And we know that touch affects taste. So people will have different levels of sweetness depending on the texture. Texture can affect smell. Smell can affect texture. There are aromas in shampoo that make your hair feel softer. There are aromas in low-fat yogurts that will make the yogurt seem richer and thicker. So there are these constant interactings between touch, taste, and smell. They're not just all there and they just contribute their own little piece of information. Rather, they affect one another's workings. And that's why what you're always getting when you talk about the taste or that flavor is always at least a combination of touch, taste, and smell, and sometimes even touch from the outside. So, you know, the chocolate bars you're eating, the feel of the paper, the feel of the packaging, the roughness or smoothness, all of that is thought about by food manufacturers. When you have fruit smoothies that you buy them in waxy cartons, and that feeling of the smooth slipperiness of the carton is almost imitating the gloopy gluiness of the smoothie inside. So these are ways in which your senses take in all the information you're given and then try to sum up what's going on and put it into a single unified experience of flavor.
So I think with that, what we're going to try and do is just basically just go back a little bit, just try and show you how different chocolates can be, because we're going to start with two chocolates made by the same guy, Philip Kaufman, but from very different parts of the world. The first one is from Peru, from a bean which is called Pura porcelana, because it's the pink one which Barry's sort of holding up here. This bean was thought to have gone extinct until it was rediscovered in the early 2000s. It's called porcelana because when you cut the seed open, it's actually white. It's also known as Gran Blanco for obvious reasons. But if you try this and just sort of describe the sensations and the textures, there's nothing added to it. Hopefully, shouldn't be too gritty, but I mean, if we sort of go back and now just sort of try it, and then we're going to sort of move to another bar made in the same factory to a very similar recipe, but we're just going to try and show you how amazing, you know, just as we all know that sort of, you know, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon taste completely different, have completely different flavor profiles. Same is true of chocolate. So just try this one and see what you think about it.
Meaty, I get the meatiness. I think that's very good. Almost a soy flavor to it. Umami-ish soy.
So one of the things I've learned from you, Barry, is that one of the things I should always be sort of trying to ask is, when I have a chocolate, am I thinking of sort of satin, velvet, or, you know?
Or silk, satin, or velvet. Same with a wine. You give people a red wine, you say, it's one of these three, which is it? And people can do this very well. And of course, you don't drink satin or velvet or silk, but
back to that textural.
Our tongues have got those sensitivities the same way our fingers have. And so some people saying silky, Marmite's good. That's again that umami-ish soy kind of part. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Citrus coming through, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should now move. So this is in Peru, and what we're now going to do is we're going to move to the Virunga National Park in the DRC, and on the borders of Uganda. This is where Diana Fossey does all her great stuff, and Goodall does all her great stuff trying to protect the mountain gorillas. In fact, this chocolate here is actually grown by 4,000 ladies called the Femme de Virunga. But you know, again, there's nothing added to either of these chocolates. But I think you'll find the flavor profile is just completely different. But they are made in the same factory in Switzerland, Felkin, and they're made to very similar recipes, thanks to the great Vera Hoffman. But they are utterly different, I think, in terms of the flavor profile. Okay. And you know, that's one of the fun things. That's, I think, you know, wine obviously has it, coffee has it, but coconut, excellent. There is a word that I always sort of use for this one, which I'm going to basically type in a sec, which one of the strange words which we always sort of get accused of being a bit silly about when we sort of have it on here is the word chocolatey. But actually, to me, this is, you know, this chocolate is not really that chocolatey, but this one, you know, is definitely chocolatey. There's sort of no doubt that this is, you know, what you would expect a chocolate to have. And if any of you've got red wine, I think one of the things you'll find is that unless you've got a Cabernet Franc, this is going to be quite tough. Whereas sort of this goes great with anything with a lot of tannins and any sort of body or depth, or, you know, like a good Syrah or a good Cab Sauv or anything like that.
I get the coconut, and I like tahini as a
tahini is awesome.
You are good tasters, I tell you. You guys are really, really good tasters.
But it is just amazing. I mean, I do think this thing about being able to articulate and actually developing a common language for flavor is going to be a very interesting challenge. And I think, ironically, actually, I think one of the things which lockdown will do is that we will be able to do more and more of these virtual tastings. And one of the things we find is that when we do in-person tastings, the sort of the ones which people turn up to, is we can't get people to articulate because there's always 2 or 3 people who sort of lead it. But this way, by forcing you all to sort of, not by forcing you, but by asking you all in your own comfort of your own sort of homes to actually sort of articulate what it is, you become better at it. And we also become better at basically pulling out all those different flavors.
Yeah.
And for those of you who want to basically know what it is which is driving the flavor, it's very similar to what happens with wine. So there are basically 3 different bits which drive the flavor. The cocoa varietal, you know, there are loads of different cocoa varietals. The cocoa pod looks basically about like a rugby football, that can be different shapes, it can be different colors. By the way, the reason why we're showing the tree is because there's this wacky thing about cocoa, which is it doesn't grow like any other fruit that you've ever come across. It doesn't grow off the vines, it doesn't grow off the branches, it doesn't grow at the top, it doesn't grow at the bottom. It grows out the trunk of the tree. The only other fruit which you'll ever come across which may be like this is probably the durian. But anyway, so the pods make it a huge difference, and then the fermentation makes a huge difference. So what happens is the pulp, which is this sort of delicious sort of mucilage around it, actually ferments with different yeasts and different bacteria. It's not like wine where people will obviously use specific yeasts and bacteria to sort of get them going. In chocolate's case, it's just what's around. And then depending on how long you ferment it for, depending how many times you allow the oxygen, how many times you turn it, you will get radically different flavors. And then finally, the last bit with chocolate is how you dry it. So most chocolate grows in 0 to 20 degrees, a band around the equator. Most of those places you can put the fermented beans out in the sun and dry them, like here in Madagascar. But there are a few places like Papua New Guinea or Samoa or Fiji or Indonesia where it rains so much that you can't do that. And if you basically have to, what is called fire dry, you will often get the smoke from the fires permeating the beans and actually sort of creating them to be a bit smoky. But right, I think we should probably let lots of people ask you lots of questions, Barry, before we go.
Absolutely.
But we should probably try and ask questions now to all of the punters who've been here so far. Would that be a good thing to do?
Yes.
And by the way, just the last bit is what I was going to sort of say is that I think Barry sort of pointed this out, is that when you look at what you're basically getting off the Taza, one of the interesting things is that you don't get a lot of flavor notes. You get a bit, but it's nothing like what you get off, for example, here. And the reason for this is because after Fry worked out how to grind chocolate, and this is the example of the sort of kit that he uses, and this is made, the Stone Ground, the Somerville, Massachusetts Taza bar is made like that. What really makes a huge difference in chocolate to bring out the flavor, and the stuff that Barry talks about, the stuff that Barry works on, why these things taste so different, is because there's the potential in the beans, there's the potential in the fermentation, but what brings it out is actually the grinding and the conching, which basically is the stuff that Lindt discovered by accident about 150 years ago, which is that if you grind cocoa nibs, or the beans, the roasted nibs, for a long period of time, 10, 20, 30, 50, even 100 hours, the heat actually brings out the volatiles in the chocolate, and that's what's actually giving it the flavor. Right, should we have the quiz?
The quiz, yes.
If there is a prize for anybody who wins. This is sort of pseudo-anonymous, so one of you four will get it. But if you all basically go back to Mentimeter, and I think I've got the number somewhere, so the more of you, the merrier. And the code you need on menti.com is 23 68 32. Sorry, 38.2. I'll put that back in here. It's 23 68 38.2.
And we're not going to spend so long counting these votes as they are doing in Nevada. Don't worry.
Oh, I don't. I was actually looking earlier on and see if we've got a reaction to it yet. Right. So here we go. Here is your general knowledge on wine and chocolate and other quizzes. So the first thing is, right, you're all there. We may have missed a question. I'm not quite sure what it is. But anyway, what did the Aztecs not do with chocolate? So any of you who've read your history will know, did they use it as a currency, mix it with spices and drink it, smoke it, or fatten up a male warrior for a year and then sacrifice him? Well done to all of you who noticed that it's tobacco that we smoke, not cacao. They did actually fatten up a male warrior, and they definitely used it as a currency. That's what Columbus thought they did with it. Ah, yes, Barry, over to you. Tell us where we grow wine. Tell us where we grow chocolate.
Yeah, where do we grow? Which countries grow both wine and chocolate?
I'll give you a clue. You need a rainforest to grow cacao, and that doesn't work in France.
You've got to grow cacao to make chocolate, and you make wine. Which country? Time's up.
No. Well, everybody who said Australia. Chile is too far south. We do have a great Chilean chocolate maker, but called Mark Gerritz from Obolo, and he makes some amazingly good chocolates, actually. But Chile is too far south. It doesn't.
But a very good, but a very. I would have gone for Chile as well until I seen this said. So yeah, good guess.
Oh yes, well we've given you the answer to this a few times.
Which company produced the first commercial chocolate bar? Was it Cadbury's, Fry's, Godiva, Hershey? 3, 2, 1.
Well done, everybody who remembered Fry's. Joseph Fry, 1847, indeed. Definitely not Hershey. They're a lot later.
No. Pub quiz. Which university was established first? Glasgow?
All of these universities, so I sort of feel that you should know the answer.
Glasgow, Edinburgh, Berkeley, or École Normale Supérieure. Which one was oldest? Yes,
Good.
Glasgow, fantastic.
Very, very, very good. It's
Very well done, because
the oldest
Glasgow
university in the world.
Glasgow's pre-Reformation and Edinburgh's post-Reformation. So Edinburgh's an upstart university, as we always think of it. So there we are.
But St Andrews, I think, beats both of them.
St Andrews beat both of them and beat most of Oxford and Cambridge.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
800, I think, was St Andrews. Yeah.
Although I think it was a Thai massage university, which sort of can claim to be even older.
And there used to be a university in Dunwich, which was swept into the sea.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which of the following does not contain butyric acid?
Yes. Your underarm, actually, believe it or not, it's the only bit of your body which does produce sweat, which has butyric acid in it.
Exactly, exactly. Auxiliary odors, there they are. Last question.
Oh, yes.
Which of the following is not a taste? Sweetness, umami, bitterness, astringency.
You can tell this is one of your audiences, Barry, because they all get it right. This is the first time we've ever got everyone to get that one right.
These are my people. I love you guys. You're great. Wonderful.
Wow. Whoever is XB, well done. Right into us. And well done, Anne, too.
Yeah, you nailed it. Fantastic. Great job. Wonderful. Good.
So lots of questions for Barry, but look, basically just here's our bottom line. Always look at the ingredients. You get what you pay for with a $1 1 bar. Always have a couple of chocolates on the go. Always have it with some wine. Always have it with friends. And we'd love you all to sort of join Cocoa Runners. We basically run a sort of program, a bit like sort of listening to the radio and getting a great sort of playlist of music every month. We send you 4 different, chocolates every month. We never repeat them or anything else. But more importantly, what we can do, I think, I'm going to be struggling to do this, but if anyone wants to ask questions, just we will basically open it up so that anybody can talk. So if you want to talk, that much we can do. I will probably stop recording now too, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But if anyone wants to talk, just let me know and I will just open it up, or just put basically put your questions in the chat.
And thanks very much, Spencer. Much appreciated.
Barry, thank you so much. We've learned so much, as always. And hopefully we've sort of worked out how to do sort of desert island discs through chocolate.